Hey, everybody, how's it going? You have reached Native Opinion, the video version, and audio too. Yes, and the podcast. We are an indigenous. Start there first. We're an indigenous information and education radio show and podcast. And every week we talk about current affairs related to and from our own Native American perspectives. My name is Michael Kicking Bear, and the guy next to me. This way, he is
David Grayow. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening.
How are you, brother? It's good to hear your voice.
Oh, thank you. I'm doing well, thank you. Good to hear yours too.
Doing the show alone sucks. Sucks.
It's difficult.
Yeah,
It's difficult.
it was like not having somebody to bounce ideas off of is, just turns into a monologue, and I'm not a good monologuer. I've decided. So, so I'm glad you're here.
As a quick side note,
Yep.
for those of you who like astrology, there is a super blood moon tonight, eclipse.
Oh,
Depending on where you are in the U.S., the East Coast folks will get a good view of it high in the sky, starting at 10:30, and I think the full eclipse is at midnight.
oh wow. Okay.
So, check your local news science channels, links, station, and they'll tell you what the best time for you to view is.
Cool. I don't even. Well, let's see. I don't know what it is with the weekends here. I don't know about there in Florida, but here it's like they just don't do the news like in the evenings here anymore. It seems like they're finishing like late rounds of golf or other weird stuff. So I didn't really get to see a newscast. Usually they'll mention it, but so you are the first that's mentioned it that I'm aware of. So I'll have to step outside after we're done doing the show here.
Well, you won't start seeing it until about 10:30. It'll start. The Earth will start crossing over in front of, the sun, so it'll block the light from the sun, and that's the eclipse is actually the shadow from the Earth that you're seeing.
Now, what would happen if it stopped? It's just all of a sudden the Earth just stops in front of the sun. It's just.
Then we would be screwed.
We would be screwed beyond your burned to a crisp.
Beyond repair. In the military, that's termed FUBAR.
Yeah. Well, I mean, realistically, so when if the Earth is crossing in front of the sun, what actually is causing the eclipse? Then because obviously my science sucks. So.
It's the shadow that the Earth casts on the moon. If you see a full moon, that's actually light from the sun reflecting off the moon.
Off the backside?
No, front side.
Oh, okay.
We can't see the backside of the moon.
Obviously, guys, do not take any science advice from me. Especially, I have no idea. I'm just worried about basically the planet stop rotating and then all kinds of really bad stuff starts to happen. So,
yeah, we would just drift off into space individually.
Exactly. You're just walking out your door, down your driveway, and all of a sudden, my feet aren't touching the ground. What the hell? That would be different, but
Yeah, it would be. So yeah, it's just the Earth passing in front of the sun as it's rotating around the sun, causing a shadow on the moon.
Okay. Well, I'll have to step outside and see if I can get a gander of that, because it sounds like it doesn't happen all that often, so that I can remember.
No. Well, the last one was last year sometimes, but they don't happen annually. It's once every so many years that they'll happen, 2 years back to back. But it's pretty neat. They're pretty neat to see.
Very cool. Very cool. We'll have to check that out. Let us know if you can see it. Send us pictures. What the hell? Post them to our Facebook page. If you guys can see that, that would be very cool. Just to see a bunch of pictures show up, on social media
from
and
all
stuff.
Across the world and see who can see what. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be cool. Maybe I'll do that. But all right, if you guys want to reach us here on our show, you can email us, hosts with an S, hosts at nativeopinion.com. You can reach us through our two social media accounts. It's facebook.com/Native Opinion Podcast. And we're also available through Twitter. It's at Native Opinion over there. Our website is nativeopinion.com, of course, where you can get all of the audio from our past podcast episodes, as well as now we're going to be adding these video episodes up there as well. Just for a point of clarity, especially for anybody that might be connecting through our YouTube channel and you see episode 400 and you don't see anything earlier, it's just because there aren't any. So we've kind of started our video adventure, if you will, after 6 years of our audio show. So that's why you can't see anything of this show in a video format earlier than 400. So hopefully that doesn't make it. It's kind of like Star Wars when it started with like episode 4 instead of episode 1.
Right.
Stuff like that. So that's why that's like that. So you can also call us and leave us a voicemail or a text message at 860-800-5595. And that's that number there. So any of those will work. Cool.
Absolutely. Excuse me. Well, we have a diverse listening audience, and I'm ever so thankful, as I know my brother's so thankful. We are
absolutely
just floored with the response and support that we get from all of our listeners. And we want you to know that it's humbling and it's rewarding. We thank you ever so much. Our patrons who help us stay afloat, thank you ever so much for doing so. And if you would like to become a patron, you can see how to do that by logging onto our website at nativeopinion.com/support and on our Facebook page, and just click on the Learn More button. And you can also help us by telling your friends, family, and colleagues about the show. And give us a 5-star review on iTunes. And again, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for listening, sharing our show, and helping us grow and growing with us. You guys are the bomb.
Definitely. Thank you guys very, very much. Appreciate it. We also appreciate those of you that have supported our site at MoheganTradingPost.com. Appreciate that very, very much. Selling apparel and other items that we sell there, indigenous foods. So we're in the midst of doing a brand new website, top to bottom. So once that is up and available, we'll let you guys know. The old site is still up there, but there'll be a lot more products coming once the new site launches. So I'll definitely let you guys know. We sell cool hats like this one right here. So it's MoheganTradingPost.com for that. And again, thanks so very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mohegan Trading Post.
All right.
All right, you're listening to episode 402. What does it all mean?
I have no idea.
It's anybody's guess.
The world is so crazy right now. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. In today's show, we're going to talk about a false vindication for the religious right.
Yep.
The accumulation of more than 4 decades of trying to outlaw abortion. You're really going to be surprised at what we are going to share with you in this article. It's really an eye-opener, so stay tuned. And what the upcoming abortion ruling means in and for Indian country, and released initial findings after a 9-month investigation into the fraught legacy of Indian boarding schools that the U.S. government ran or supported for a century and a half. And the federal government moves forward in boarding school healing journey. And in our Racism in America segment, even for someone who has designs on a career in filmmaking, Gwenna Gentle couldn't believe it. I couldn't either. Really.
That was crazy.
And it was crazy.
And it's still not resolved yet, I would say. So,
No, and if I remember, I'm just going to say something now. They're going to try to link that as one case
mhm.
or one incident. It's actually the incident times the number of people on that bus.
Yep, exactly.
So I'm hoping people that are paying attention to bringing those to court are paying attention. I hope they bring it to the system as multiple cases and not just one, because if that happens, they're just going to get away with, oh, we dodged that bullet and we're only going to get blamed for one instead of the number of cases of people on that bus.
Yep.
So if there's 50 people on that bus, there's 50 cases of racial profiling, not one. So
Yeah. And on a similar note, brother, I just want to mention this as well because it's our end of the country here. We just want to send our condolences to all the families that lost people over the weekend in Buffalo, New York.
Buffalo, yes.
That was another racially motivated killing by basically an 18 to 19-year-old who
White
went out of his
supremacist.
went out of his way, drove something like 4 hours. He wasn't even from anywhere in the area. 4 hours just to go and kill people of color, and then had the gall to plead not guilty.
Right.
So, like I said, the country has a very serious problem, and it has to address it. So,
It doesn't want to.
no, of course not. You can see it. You can see the the immense pushback.
Oh, sure.
So,
Sure. Well, I was excited when I found this first bit of information. And how long have you heard me say, brother, it's all about the numbers?
many times.
Truly. Well, keep that statement in mind. It's all about the numbers. This first article, The Religious Right and the Abortion Myth, written by Randall Balmer for stltoday.com. So there's a lot of discussion, I'll say, around abortion. And it's all valid. It's all valid. But if we're going to be honest, in the discussion about abortion, it is all about the numbers. Now, the push to stop legal abortion is all about preserving and securing a hold on the ideology of white supremacy. If one was to drill down and see what the push has been in the past, it is all about preserving white majorities. Now, having said that, I'm not saying that some people are against abortion for strong religious beliefs. I honestly believe that there are some people out there who are. I honestly do. But on its face, the Texas bill banning abortion and the Supreme Court's narrow decision not to issue a stay kind of represents a vindication for the religious right. Now, the history of that movement, the movement to outlaw abortion, however, is more complicated. Now, according to the article, and I believe what this author is writing, because I felt the same way, racism, not opposition to abortion, lies at the heart of the movement.
Joining us now is Elise Hogue. She served as the president of NARAL Pro-Choice America for 8 years. She authored The Lie That Binds, a book that offers a comprehensive history of the right-wing anti-abortion movement in America and its ties to white supremacy. Ms. Hogue, thank you for being here tonight. You have made these connections very clearly in your book. It's not one that people think about very clearly, that the opposition, the conservative opposition to abortion is not necessarily about religion or conservative values. It's about power.
Absolutely. And then more than that, Allie, it is about power of the minority over a rising majority. You have to remember at the time all of these machinations were going on. What was happening? What was the backdrop in American culture? You had the rise of women's liberation. You had the Black Power movement. You had the pill, widely available contraception. So sexual liberation, gay rights. It was all threatening the hegemonic grip that the white patriarchy had enjoyed since the beginning of the United States as we know it. And all of that was being threatened in the moment that there was a sort of craven decision to weaponize abortion as the tip of the spear to roll back decades of social progress. And I think the lesson that we have to learn from that is, although they would want us to believe that this leaked decision, should it come to pass, is endgame and they will stop with abortion, abortion is and always has been a Trojan horse for a desperate cling to power by the white patriarchy in a country that is rapidly and has been rapidly changing for decades.
That's a remarkable thing for a lot of people to think about, because one doesn't think about the elimination of Roe v. Wade as a Trojan horse. They think of that as the end game. They think of that as the capture of the whole thing. Tell me what you mean by Trojan horse. What do you believe in this quest for power is in danger?
It's an excellent question. And allow me to say, because it's very important, that if it was only abortion, that should be enough, right?
Yes.
Abortion is a fundamental freedom that has to be embraced by our nation as a core value in order to actually aspire to that promise of democracy, justice, and human empowerment. So, period, right? However, that is not all that they are after. Whether you look at the history, which, as you say, you did a tremendous job, by the way, Allie, in the intro, but we worked very, very hard and assiduously researched in the book, or whether you just look at the actual decision and the way it's come down, it is written in such a way that nothing is sacrosanct. That all of these rights that we have achieved for groups that lived on the margins of society, because they were not written into the Constitution the way white men were, all of those rights are in jeopardy. And let's be clear, one of the things that we have always said is if you don't have the power of the majority with you, and by the way, the legal right to abortion has always been a popular opinion with the majority. Pre-Roe, when Roe came down, and it is today. But when you don't have the power of the majority, what do? You resort to disinformation, which abortion disinformation predated COVID disinformation by a lot. We traveled a lot of the same vectors. Voter suppression always goes hand in hand with robbing women of reproductive freedom, and court capture. And we may be at the end game of court capture unless we make some radical and dramatic changes, but we are not at the end game of what this court will dismantle in terms of rights of others that they did not recognize in the originalist version of the Constitution.
So let's talk about what happens now and how people who are concerned about this motivate decision makers at any level, whether it's in Congress or at the court. When you say abortion should be enough, like if there was nothing else, if that were the end game, that should be enough. That's true. But when you add that extra part about these other things that are not enumerated in the Constitution, which some lawyers say is weak tea. That argument is strange, because there's lots of rights we enjoy that are not enumerated in the Constitution. But when you add all of those things that can be taken away, should that motivate more people who otherwise were not motivated by Roe v. Wade? Should that motivate people who say rights in general are starting to be dismantled across this country and this becomes existential to our democracy?
Do I wish everybody was motivated by the right to abortion because robbing women and pregnant people of their reproductive autonomy should be enough? Absolutely, I do. However, if that is not your motivation, you should not think you are safe. There is the old adage of they did not come for me and so I did not fight. They are coming for all of us unless you look like them and believe like them. And now they believe with the power of the court that they have it. But what they don't have is the power of the people. They depend on our willingness to believe that we are beaten and to go home. And I will tell you, having been down at the Supreme Court myself last night, I was invigorated by the fact that people are not going home. They are coming out. And they will continue to come out, whether it's for abortion funds, whether it's for legislative reform, whether it's for court reform, or whether it's at the polls in November. People are coming out.
Okay, in 1968, Christianity Today, which is the flagship magazine of evangelicalism, sponsored.
Absolutely is. Yep.
Co-sponsored a conference with the Christian Medical Society to discuss the morality of abortion. Now, there was 26 evangelical theologians who debated the matter over several days and then issued a statement. And not shockingly to me, they acknowledged the ambiguities of the issue, allowed for many different approaches. Go figure. Now, quoting from the article, whether the performance of an induced abortion is sinful, we are not agreed. But about the necessity of it and permissibility for it under certain circumstances, we are in accord. So, under that conference, they're totally in agreement with abortion. This was in 68. It gets even better. In 1971, in a meeting at St. Louis, the messenger of delegates to the Southern Baptist Convention, not exactly a redoubt of liberalism, but they passed a resolution calling for the legalization of abortion, a position they reaffirmed in 74, a year after Roe, and again in 1976.
Yeah, so hypocrisy much, right?
Right. So, two successive editors for Christianity Today, took equivocal stands on abortion. So, when the Roe decision was handed down, W.A. Criswell, pastor of the First Baptist Church in Dallas, sometime president of the Southern Baptist Convention, and one of the most famous evangelicals in the 20th century, issued a statement praising the ruling. So they were for it. Now, Francis Schaeffer, the intellectual godfather of the religious right, tried to enlist Billy Graham in his anti-abortion crusade. Graham turned him down. Even James Dobson, who later became an implacable foe of abortion, acknowledged that in 1973, here we go, the Bible was silent on the matter, and therefore it was plausible for an evangelical to believe that a developing embryo or fetus was not regarded as a full human being, end quote. I don't think I'll need to read that again. It'll be in the show notes.
Mm-hmm.
So people are probably scratching their heads saying, well, what really happened? Okay, so according to Paul Weyrich, a conservative activist and architect of the religious right, that's right, the Paul Weyrich, the movement started in the 70s in response to attempts on the part of the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, to rescind the tax-exempt status of whites-only segregation academies, many of them church-sponsored, and Bob Jones University because of its segregationist policies. Now, among those affected was Jerry Falwell. Everybody remembers Jerry Falwell.
Of course.
He referred to the civil rights movement as, in quotes, civil wrongs. Now, he had opened his own segregation academy in 1967. The IRS actions against segregated institutions, not abortion. I'll read that again. The IRS actions against racially segregated institutions, not abortion, is what mobilized evangelical activists in the 1970s. Now, Weyrich's genius was to understand that racism the defense of racial segregation was not likely to energize grassroots evangelical voters. So here's the rub. He, Weyrich, Falwell, and others deftly flipped the script, folks. Instead of the religious right mobilizing in defense of segregation, evangelicals decried government intrusion into their affairs as an assault on religious freedom. How many times have you heard that?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All the while, they failed to acknowledge that tax exemption is a form of public subsidy, and that pursuant to the Brown decision of 1954, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and the Green versus Conley ruling of 71, the government had every right to stipulate that tax-exempt public institutions not engage in racial exclusion. So, someone, go ahead.
I was going to say, so you know, what you get a good sense of, I hope, what you should hear, is what this article is pointing out, in my view, also, is where white entitlement is coming from. Okay, because where you have a group of religious zealots, basically. The article used the term "flip the script." So it wasn't working out for them on one hand, and decided to change the narrative. Now, how many times have we talked on this show about narratives in the context, again, of especially indigenous people? Right? Another prime example of this. The country was founded on two aspects: capitalism driven by religious persecution. It's as simple as that.
Yep.
So,
all right. So what about abortion? Evangelicals considered abortion a, in quotes, Catholic issue until the late 1970s and expressed little interest in the matter. I'll read that again. Evangelicals considered abortion a Catholic issue until the late 70s and expressed little interest in the matter. Falwell, by his own admission, did not preach his first anti-abortion sermon until February 1978, more than 5 years after Roe.
Mm-hmm.
Now, during the midterm elections of 78, however, anti-abortion activists, Roman Catholics, leafleted the church parking lots in 4 Senate races during the final weekend of the campaign. In New Hampshire, Iowa, and 2 races in Minnesota. Now, 2 days later, in an election with a very low turnout, pro-life Republicans defeated favored Democrat candidates. Now, Weyrich.
Okay, I'm sorry. Sorry, go ahead, brother.
Weyrich, Falwell, and other leaders of the religious right had finally landed a respectable issue: opposition to abortion that would energize white evangelicals and not, incidentally, divert attention from the real origins of their movement. All right.
So here again, look at this very carefully. We're talking about, they're trying to separate themselves from presumably one type of religious sect, right? Okay. I'm not, as you guys know, I'm not a fan of organized religion. Then you're going to add into that's bad enough watching two, I'm using the word sect. It's probably wrong. I acknowledge that. Okay. But I'm going to continue to use it in this context. So you have basically two religious sects trying to differentiate themselves from each other first and foremost, and then I guess from the rest of whatever this society is, right, that we want to call America, right? Then you're going to sprinkle in a little dose of politics to go along the way. And when you were reading that, for whatever reason, it popped into my head a clip that I had heard over the weekend about, how Democrats are all pissed off at what's his face, who's the senator from West Virginia? Manchin, okay? Manchin, right?
yeah.
Okay. And how, the Democratic Party is all disappointed because he voted against the rest of the Democratic Party on, on this abortion bill that they had put forward. And so he sided with the Democrats. And Nancy Pelosi said some cute little thing about, well, we'll get this straightened out because, both Joe and I are Italian and we're both Catholics.
Without making this all about Joe Manchin, I mean, he has been, but just to, but he has been, having some meetings and discussions. Are you hopeful at all about those? And have you personally reached out to Joe Manchin?
Joe Manchin and I are Italian American. We're Catholics. We have our friendship. I've helped him with even though I think clean coal is an oxymoron, and I've told the coal miners that, I do believe in their getting their benefits, whether it's pension or health care. And so we've worked on those issues together, and we have had our conversations. But right now, this conversation is a Senate conversation. But we're just optimistic and hopeful.
What?
So again, it's very funny to me how they reach out and they go to grab, I know my camera's all frozen right now. They go to use religion when it's convenient for them, when it's politically feasible. Great example, right? So yeah, I'm just so done with all these people. I'm just done with this society. It's ridiculous. It's just absolutely ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. And it just speaks to what I was saying about, it all being about the numbers. There's just so much idiocy that goes along with, the fake outrage about abortion.
Mm-hmm.
Just so much idiocy. And it still boils down to a woman's right to choose. They can kabuki theater until the cows come home. It boils down to a woman's right to choose what a woman decides she wants to do or not do with her body. That's what it boils down to. You can't legislate a woman's physical autonomy. You can't do that. What is the matter with people? That's like somebody telling you that, you can only go take a crap on certain days of the week because the other days, there's just no resources available.
Mm-hmm.
How are they going to try to legislate a woman's autonomy? Her physical autonomy. You can't do that.
Well,
religious wise or legal wise, you can't.
I definitely hear your argument about the numbers, and I generally agree with that. The only problem with that in this context of the discussion around abortion is the fact that they're hurting white women too, presumably. Well, but here's the other side of that too. These so-called Republicans that are all gung ho to eliminate abortion in this country, at least at the federal level, and wanting it to return to the states. These folks, if their families and have daughters that get pregnant, they're going to have no problem getting abortions, no problem whatsoever. They will roll out the red carpet and do it in secret to get an abortion, while other people, regardless of skin color, are going to be very, very challenged in doing that, especially if it falls down to income levels. It's as simple as that.
Well, yes, you're correct, but it still boils down to the numbers. Think about this for a moment. In the article, it spoke about segregation.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it spoke about.
Yep.
Now, the segregationist movement was all about white supremacy. That's
Correct.
what it was all about. When abortion came about, Roe v. Wade, and it was, upheld by the Supreme Court, the movement, the anti-abortion movement became the mantra for the religious right because they could not bolster and hold on to their supremacist hold on the country if they didn't have the white majority numbers. So, in their attempts to hold on and support and bolster white supremacy, they're using women's bodies as a way to do that. It's all about the numbers. It's got nothing to do with anything but them trying to, and this old white men are making these archaic, assertions against, women's right to choose.
Yep.
And it's
Yep.
got everything to do with trying to hold on to the white majority. People can throw rocks and disagree all they want. Drill down and look. You just heard in the article how they couldn't really gain any ground with the fact that the IRS slapped their peepees and told them you can't get any public funding if you're going to have a segregationist, university.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to jump on another train and use another form of I don't know, manipulation to help bolster their segregationist agenda, which is to keep the white majority and to hold on to white supremacy. So what did they use? They used abortion. Let's fight abortion. That way, even though other women will not be able to get abortions either, we can still boost white numbers. That's what it's all about. But see, they don't think past their archaic laws. They can't see that there is no more white majority. That's why you hear the term majority and minority being used. What is that?
Well, again, I understand that argument. So, basically what it means then is if a white woman becomes pregnant and abortion is outlawed in her state, and I had mentioned on the show last week that, the most severe example of a state-sponsored abortion law is the state of Louisiana as right now, relevant to actually making it a criminal act if she seeks an abortion. So in that context, she's forced to have the child, but at the same time, so are women of color. If they are not allowed to have an abortion, they have to carry the term too, which means now we have more children of color in the world, which in my view is a good thing. So that logic, if that's, hold on, if that's their logic, it's going to backfire very, very quickly on them.
Well, it already has. That's why I said they didn't think it through until it was too late. Here's the second part of that. It's all about the numbers. The insane numbers of men of color in prison, that's the second part of that.
Yep.
Mass incarceration of men of color in prison, in their minds, will help reduce the numbers of children of color being born. They didn't think that part through either.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think in a couple of reports last year and the year before, there was, I think, 4 to 6 babies of color being born to every white baby. So, all of their archaic thought processes that are spurned and supported by their white supremacy ideology is blown up in their faces time and time again. It's all about the numbers. You have to look at everything that's transpired since Roe v. Wade, everything, and it'll become clear as to why the anti-abortion movement has gained so much ground and so much steam in such a short time.
Mm-hmm.
And 20 years, in the grand scheme of things, 20 years is a short amount of time. So, it is literally all about the numbers. It's about trying to hold on to the majority that they assumed. And they're kicking and screaming all the way out the door as it slips away from their grasp. So, there you have it.
Well, thank you, brother. Appreciate it. I just don't have any faith in any of this right now, either direction. So, for example, I don't see any meaningful resistance coming from the Democrats. Okay, whatsoever. Once again, I just point this out on those of you that catch the video version of the past. Now this being the third episode. I saw it again. Nancy Pelosi gets up behind a podium and talks all passionately about how we have to defend Roe versus Wade, and does the funky thing with her hand again, right? Along with other stupid senators and people from the House or whatever. Look, stop giving speeches about how impassioned you are about protecting a woman's right to choose. Do something.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Do something. You have the power to fix it right now.
They do.
But
absolutely.
Once again, what is Nancy Pelosi's real role? Her role is to fundraise.
Pretty much.
And so this is a gold mine for Democrats that are just in it for the dollar signs and pretend they're actually fighting for you when they're not. And meanwhile, Republicans sail right through. And then what's next? They're going to ban contraceptives. Okay. And then the S rolls downhill from there, and everything gets systematically dismantled. Why? Because he's doing this with her hand and pretending to be that we're gonna fight now. Please. You want to change my mind? Do something.
Yeah, they're not vested in doing anything.
Because I can't, guys. I can sit here on this show and tell you that I'm in support of a woman's right to choose, but I can't kick Nancy Pelosi out of office tomorrow. And I said this probably on the last 2 episodes. And other Democrats that are do-nothing Democrats.
There's lots.
And then I turn around and with Dave here, I said this last week too. So with him present, it really challenges why I even bother involving myself in the political system. What, to watch Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi stand together and go, "This will not stand. We will fight until the very end." You guys have probably seen that. There's an image from, I don't know, 1 or 2 years ago when I can't even remember what the issue was that they supposedly were fighting about. And they look like death warmed over. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer standing behind this podium together. Like they thought they were presenting themselves as some unified sense. They look like they're about to keel over and die. And I'm supposed to believe them. Right? Give me a little more of your money, and I'll fight for you. How many times have you seen that?
Yep.
So, all right. Now, last week, I kind of speculated a little bit about, what other impacts, an overturned Roe versus Wade decision would have on Indian country. And glad to see when I went out online that a lot of other people have been asking the same question, and I said that, our reservations can't become safe havens, that it should be a tribe's right to decide for themselves if they're going to offer abortions on our reservations or not. And so
I had come across this Harvard Law Review article, and the title kind of really sums it all up. It says tribes can prohibit abortions in Indian country. So, I always find it fascinating when I read these summations from the Harvard Law Review, because the title here is misleading, because what's missing, of course, is tribes can also allow abortions as well. But I'll read a little bit of this for you guys from this particular article, and this will be linked in the show notes. I won't read a lot of this because it's very, very long. But it says here, one of the most hotly contested rights under the Bill of Rights and the 14th Amendment is the right to an abortion recognized in Roe versus Wade and its offspring, yet the central right to obtain an abortion without the state imposing an undue burden, that's in quotes, seems to remain good law. This note asks whether tribal governments are similarly limited. They are not, it says. This note's argument is that the right to abortion is inapplicable to tribal governments, and therefore that tribal governments may prohibit abortions performed or obtained by their citizens on their reservations. So I really don't have to read much more of that, and it just goes into the case law. It talks about it talks about ICRA, right? The Indian Civil Rights Act. Sorry,
yeah.
I'm so very sorry.
I was giving you a few more seconds.
No, you know what it is, because it's close to ICWA, right?
Yep,
So
yep.
I always get the acronyms screwed up. But yeah, if we're talking about the 1968 Indian Civil Rights Act passed, that also plays into this. So the bottom line is, at least on our federal reservations, we have the guise of limited sovereignty. And I say very limited, all right? Because we've always got the federal government looking over our shoulders. But the bottom line is, through, the Civil Rights Act and some other provisions in law, a tribe can make the decision for themselves whether or not they want to allow or prohibit abortions. Period, end of story. It's codified that way in law. And so, much like how this whole thing is being debated, and, that seems to be all that the mainstream news media can focus on, and not asking any of our elected politicians difficult questions, like, why did Joe Manchin, side with Republicans on this particular thing without giving us any real explanations? This is exactly the kind of stuff that will get eroded over time when Republicans take control of the Congress, because I'm almost betting surely that they will at this point. Why? Because once again, I have Democratic elected officials doing this with their fingers.
They're going to knuckle you to death.
So from that vantage point, I'm very concerned about but at the same time, I'm ready to fight. And that isn't a violent threat. So I don't want any getting any bad emails that say I'm threatening to take violence and things like that. But to whatever length I can go, including, I guess, still having to get involved in the political system that does not work for me as an indigenous male. Attempt to align myself with people that make sense. And by that, I'm not meaning Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Joe Biden. Let's see, help me, brother. How long is the list?
It's
How
pretty
long
long.
is the list? Okay. Any corporate Democrat. Okay. Because you guys are a joke. Period. End of story. I would much rather find people that truly are trying to make affect change. And the whole political process in this country just takes friggin' forever. So meanwhile, while you're trying to find, somebody out there that has, real work ethics and are not tainted by corporate money and everything else, the other side, if you will, are working twice as hard to really screw the country up even more.
Pretty much.
Yeah, I've got a lot of friends in Canada who are like, don't come here. It's not much better here, but we don't need your problems here, So, I don't know. Brother. But anyway, I'll leave this in the show notes for you guys, so that you can educate yourselves on more laws that pertains to what some of our rights are. I just want to publicly thank Deb Haaland for following through on something she promised. And this recent release of the Interior Department's Indian boarding school report is exactly what I'm referring to. Before we talk about this further, brother, I am going to play a video, which I do not have queued up, of course. So let me grab that. This was a report from MSNBC, and they interviewed Crystal Echohawk, who I have a lot of deep respect for, so that she could provide comment on their airwaves relevant to this report. The findings are pretty sad, pretty devastating in many ways, and I'll also say not surprising in many ways, sadly. So let me go ahead and play this for you guys. Here we go.
While the investigation is still far from over, the report found that at least 500 Indigenous children died in government-supported schools, and that number is expected to grow. The report does not address, however, how the children died or who exactly is responsible, but it is the first time the U.S. government has made an attempt to research and acknowledge the trauma inflicted on Native American children for decades. Joining me now is Crystal Echohawk. She's the founder and executive director of Illuminative. Crystal, thank you so much for being here. It's really challenging getting through some of the atrocities we read about in this report. Like we said, it's the first time the government has attempted to comprehensively research this. Why now, and how instrumental was Secretary Deb Haaland in bringing these atrocities to light, given that she's the first Native American woman to hold the position?
Thank you so much, Tiffany, for having me. The reason it's happening now is because of Secretary Haaland. It's because of the impact I think that the Native vote had in 2020 and President Biden, nominating her for this important role. And she had a vision and deeply understood through her own personal history the impact of the boarding schools on Native American people. And this is going to be probably one of her most important legacies as Secretary of Interior.
Some of the things that I'm reading, I mean, obviously the report does not capture everything, but the children were subjected to physical abuse, sexual abuse. They were forced to try to wash the brown off them. Many died trying to escape. Based on your knowledge, being a member of the community and the tradition of sharing legacy and passing information down, who do you think was responsible for this? Where did this system even come from?
The system came from, the United States government. I mean, this was an official government policy, and we need to make no bones about this. This came from the heart of the United States government, and it was a policy to assimilate these children, but the policy was to break apart tribes and families and to rip families in half, separate children as a way to dispossess Native Americans from their land. So this was an act of genocide. This is cultural genocide, and it was very systematic. I mean, I think, I thought I had known quite a bit about what happened in the boarding schools, but reading this report, it was so hard to see it, but it's so important, the truth in black and white about how systematic and thinking about the way that they were going to rip apart these families, the way that they mixed up children from different tribes so that they had no way to speak their own language, so that they could literally annihilate these native languages and these cultural life ways. And it's just, it's really that. But I think the other frightening thing that I think everybody knew, but it's there in black and white, that there was no separation between church and state. The United States literally carved up reservations and gave them to different denominations of Christian churches. They also paid these churches to operate these schools and were paid by a per capita basis for the number of children that they had. So this is a lot, but this is the United States government, and this is a lot of the churches in this country.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that we acknowledge that. This is especially when you see all these CRT debates happening across the country. CRT isn't taught anywhere, but this is history that people should certainly learn. And I wonder, the people who call themselves pro-life, this is certainly something that should outrage them. Children as young as 4 years old were separated from their family. This dates back generations. So I remember seeing when children in Central America were separated, and people said, this isn't America, this isn't who we are. This is as American as apple pie. What does restitution even look like at this point?
I mean, we have to continue. One, we have to urge Congress. Congress must pass the Truth and Healing Commission Policies Act. There was a hearing just this last week, and we need to ensure that there's a federal commission, that is really resourced and has all the powers to really get at the bottom of the truth and to hold the United States government and all the different agencies that were complicit in part of this, and as well as the churches and any others that were complicit in what happened to Native Americans. That is absolutely critical. And I think, the Secretary Holland has really made it known. I think she has an intention to travel throughout this country over the next year to really be in conversation with tribal leaders about what does repair look like? What does justice look like?
Yeah.
What does healing look like? But we need a revitalization and investment in Native American cultural life ways and languages. The trauma that is being unleashed right now, we're all reliving it because there's not a Native American that hasn't been touched by what happened in those boarding schools. And so it's going to mean a lot of investment, I think, in looking at mental health resources and a variety of different things. Because as you said at the beginning, Tiffany, this is only the beginning. And the report says that they expect the numbers of children that are buried to be potentially up into the hundreds of thousands. We just don't know yet.
Wow.
So there needs to be an investment across the board in these resources to really ensure that this investigation is done thoroughly.
So there you go. Well said. Well said. Much respect to Crystal. I would add, she mentioned the need to have Congress, empower some things. I would also like to see the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People fully brought to bear and embraced in this country. Not some watered down crap. They won't even, they barely acknowledge it, but it's certainly not even part of legislative law or anything like that in this country.
The adoption of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in 2007 was a major achievement by Indigenous peoples and their allies. The declaration has political, legal, moral, and symbolic implications. It is the boldest recognition of ethnicity as a factor in international relations since the inception of the United Nations. Based on its substance and drafting history over 25 years, I can say that the declaration has three pillars, which are interconnected. One, the right to self-determination. Two, the right to lands, territories, and resources. And finally, three, cultural rights. The declaration has to be read as a whole to make the connections among its 46 articles. And in analyzing an indigenous issue under any of the three pillars, one has to bring in elements of the other two pillars as well. During the drafting of the declaration, indigenous peoples put forward a number of concepts that were not accepted as human rights and were eventually included in the text, especially the following 5 points. First, the significance of collective rights as human rights. Second, land rights as collective human rights. Third, the crucial importance of the right to self-determination for indigenous peoples, including respect for their own governance systems and their right to free, prior, and informed consent. Fourth, spiritual rights and spiritual relation to the land. And fifth, recognition of a rich body of cultural rights as a response to ethnocide, in other words, the erasure of groups through the destruction of their cultures. So, despite continuing challenges, are there examples of improvement on the ground? Indeed, we have some such examples in the form of referenda, constitutional and legislative reforms, judicial decisions, and formal apologies. For example, following negotiations between Denmark and the Home Rule government of Greenland, a referendum in 2008 affirmed Greenland's autonomous status. In 2001, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights ruled in favor of the Aguastingni community in their petition against the state of Nicaragua, finding that the right to property, as recognized by the American Convention on Human Rights, protects customary land and resource rights for indigenous peoples as well. This was the first international court decision to address indigenous peoples' rights positively. Others have followed since, both in the Americas and in Africa. In Latin America, there have been major legislative and constitutional changes, recognizing the existence of indigenous peoples and the nature of states as multicultural, such as in Bolivia, Ecuador, and Guatemala, and recognizing a number of indigenous languages as official. In some so-called developed countries, we have witnessed state recognition of historic injustices and the issuance of formal apologies. In 1997, Norway's King Harald V publicly apologized to the Sami people for the repression and injustices they suffered through the policy of Norwegianization. Australia followed in 2008, declaring a formal apology to the lost generation of Aboriginal peoples due to the country's boarding schools policies. This was followed by a similar apology by Canada in 2008, again regarding boarding schools. Japan also in 2008 recognized the Ainu people of Hokkaido as indigenous peoples of the country. In 2010, El Salvador likewise recognized the indigenous peoples of the country while also providing a formal apology. The same year, the US issued one of the least known apologies due to inadequate publicity. In 2016, Taiwan also apologized to the indigenous peoples of the country. The question remains, are apologies enough? It is clear that for any apology to be meaningful, indigenous peoples concerned must participate in a substantive manner through their own governance structures.
The question is, yes, exactly. What does justice really look like? What is that action going to be? And I'm all for it. I really am. To have those discussions and not only discuss them, but I want them enacted. We've talked about on this show, we have to stop asking but demanding at this point on certain things. Because Indian country is owed. I mentioned a couple of weeks ago on an episode how the state of Connecticut, for example, has gone ahead and makes a elective requirement to learn about Black, African American, and Latino studies, a requirement, but omits Native American studies.
Now, an historic move in Connecticut to change high school course requirements. Beginning in the fall of 2022, all high schools will have to offer elective courses on African American, Black, Puerto Rican, and Latino studies. Connecticut becomes the first state to do this and hopes to eventually make these courses required.
And while I know that we have a state senator that has introduced pretty much the same bill specifically to Native American people, this is the problem we have in this country. The omission of us, the erasure of us, the histories related to us that are systematically still being removed. And so that would be one area I would love to have a discussion with Secretary Haaland on, that it must be a requirement in American public schools at, beginning at the very earliest stages, elementary school on up through. Why is it that, students are only starting to get a sense or any kind of history taught relevant to Native American studies at the collegiate level? that is absolutely unacceptable. And this report is just another symptom of, a history that's continued to go, shrouded. If 200 bodies hadn't been discovered in Canada, I don't know if we would have. And between that and the fact that we have a Native American woman leading the Department of Interior, I don't know if we'd ever have gotten a report like this. So I thank Secretary Howland from the bottom of my heart, and Brian Newland for doing this. Go ahead, brother. And then I'm going to read the article here that we have. So.
Yeah, I was just going to say the non-native community actually believes they teach about native peoples. Well, there's the Thanksgiving story.
Yeah.
There's the fur trade, and there's the discovery of America. We teach about Native Americans in our curricula.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all I've got.
We
It's
must.
a sad state of affairs.
We must. So this article is by Jenna Coons for Native News Online in regards to this report. And she writes, the United States Department of Interior today released its initial findings after a 9-month investigation into the fraught legacy of Indian boarding schools that the United States government ran or supported for a century and a half. The 106-page report, penned by Assistant Secretary of Interior of Indian Affairs, Brian Newland, details for the first time that the federal government operated or supported 408 boarding schools across 37 states, including Alaska and Hawaii between 1819 and 1969. About half of the boarding schools were staffed or paid for by religious institutions. The investigation identified and marked, the investigation identified marked and unmarked burial sites at 53 of these schools. Though the Department of Interior expects to find the number of children buried at boarding schools across the nation to be in the, quote, thousands or tens of thousands. Let that one sink in. The DOI also identified more than 1,000 additional federal and non-federal institutions that didn't fall under its definition of, quote, federal Indian boarding school, close quote. Those additional institutions, such as Indian day schools, sanitariums, asylums, orphanages, and standalone dormitories, worked similarly to assimilate Native youth into white society. Quote, the consequences of federal Indian boarding school policies, including the intergenerational trauma caused by the family separation and cultural eradication inflicted upon generations of children as young as 4 years old, are heartbreaking and undeniable, close quote, said Secretary of Interior Deb Haaland. Quoting her again, we continue to see the evidence of this attempt to forcibly assimilate Indigenous people in the disparities that communities face. It is my priority to not only give voice to the survivors and descendants of federal Indian boarding school policies, but also to address the lasting legacies of these policies so Indigenous peoples can continue to grow and heal, close quote. So one thing, we just played an MSNBC piece, and at least they gave, decent airtime. I also saw, once again, a 15-second soundbite, more or less, on CBS News on this. This is also part of the problem. When real data is presented, the news media doesn't give a crap. They won't air it. We've given other examples where Heidi Heitkamp, when she was senator, put together. She wanted to get data collected from IHS and other people in the healthcare field from Indian country and asked them all to come to Washington to have a summit that she never attended. That there was a vote that she had to participate in, and that was more important than hosting the very event that she herself wanted to elevate. So, it's like we need real action, dedicated action that people are going to continue to solve these ongoing problems. I mean, this is another one, and it took, again, an Indigenous woman to lead a department properly and follow it all the way through to a conclusion. In this case, a report.
Well, the fact that this report came out at her behest is proof positive that those children's deaths were never meant to come to light. Nothing was ever supposed to be known about the atrocities this country was part of. This country, instituted,
Yep.
supported, paid for. It was never meant to see the light of day. We were still supposed to be the boogeyman that murdered and ravaged white settlers that raced across the plains to steal our lands and pillage our I'm going to use the word resources.
Yep.
That's the image that this country wanted people to continue to harbor. They didn't want people to know that the United States government was the boogeyman that caused Native peoples to have to try to fight for their survival. They didn't want people to know that. They didn't want people to know that this government was responsible for stealing children to make them assimilate into a white supremacist ideology community that we had no part of being of. We had no need to be assimilated into anything. This country is responsible for destroying languages, for destroying cultures, for destroying lives. This country is responsible for that.
Absolutely. And that, again, it's what is, we have this report now. We have other, very good data. Like, Illuminative, the organization that Crystal Echohawk leads, has great data that they've collected over the years. And is Congress going to do something with this? See, Dave shaking his head, in the negative, and that's the challenge. Again,
you're gonna get the knuckle affirmative.
Yeah, exactly. We care about Indian country. That's what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And I'm going to slap it down and tell them the truth. No, you don't.
No, you don't care.
No, you don't. This country hasn't cared since its inception. For example, here's a quote from Brian Newland. This report confirms that the United States directly targeted American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian children in the pursuit of a policy of cultural assimilation that coincided with Indian territorial dispossession. Close quote. Newland wrote in his letter to Holland along with his submission of Volume 1 of the investigative report on April 1st. Quote, I believe that this historical context is important to understand the intent and scale of the federal Indian boarding school system and why it persisted for 150 years, close quote. They knew.
Of course they knew.
And the amount of bodies that have, come up, not just across North America, okay? They all knew, and I'm including Canada now when I say this.
Yep.
They knew. Now it's time to pay the piper. Consequence time. This country murdered our people.
Yep.
There is no reason to sugarcoat that. They get very nervous in Washington when they refuse to embrace the word genocide. They'll try to sugarcoat it and, use some other flowery speech at the same time, act like they're supporting Indian country, like through, the Council on Indian Affairs, the Committee on Indian Affairs. Do something.
Yep.
And when I say do something, that means act on the data we give you. Act on whatever comes back from Secretary Haaland as recommendations for action. And not change it. Whatever that might be. Here's something the country could do. Instead of hiding an apology, as discussed from Mark Charles, your leader, whatever president it is, I don't even care about political party affiliation. This country owes Indian country an apology. Now, there might be people in Indian country that say, well, I don't want an apology, whatever. Okay. But the country hasn't apologized for the atrocities such as this, as outlined in this report.
Well, the admission of guilt brings a lot of consequences. They're not going to willingly admit, even though the information is there before them.
Yep.
They're not going to willingly admit that this happened. Not once. Not once has anybody said or come forth and said, we need to let the American people know that this has happened. Congress isn't going to say anything about it publicly, behind closed doors. They're not going to say anything about it. And that's the saddest part of this whole thing, is that nobody is going to acknowledge, other than us native folk, nobody's going to acknowledge that this was done to these children, to families across Turtle Island. Nobody's going to acknowledge any kind of responsibility, culpability, implications, nothing.
Yep.
It's not going to happen. Sure, Deb Haaland will put it on President Biden's desk and he'll, mumble something about, how horrible this was, and that'll be it. But it's not acknowledging anything. It's that, to me, it's the saddest part of this whole thing.
Yep.
Nothing will be acknowledged as responsibility.
Well, Sleepy Joe will stand there like, it's absolutely terrible. It's terrible what this country has done to Native people. It's terrible. And my administration is going to take the lead, and we're going to fix this. That's what he's going to do. We're going to fix this. Oh, sorry.
And again, if that's his stance or his form of wording, it's still not taking responsibility. It's not acknowledgement. It's just sad that this was done to thousands of children, Native children, thousands of Native children. So, what are you going to do, U.S.? What are you going to do?
Here, guys, here's an example. This is from the article as well. Now, this part I don't put in Congress's lap, but it says investigators were limited, meaning to get the report to the point we have it now. Investigators were limited by COVID-19 restrictions and funding, Newland wrote. Congress appropriated a whopping $7 million in new funding in fiscal year 2022 for the Department of Interior to continue its investigation. The DOI did not respond to Native News Online's request on how much money was appropriated to the investigation. $7 million.
That's not a lot. It's not a lot to conduct an investigation of that magnitude.
An investigation, guys, of across the country. That's what they think of ending country.
Yeah, what did I say about acknowledgement?
Mm-hmm.
$7 million is not going to go very far.
And it infuriates me when I know the kind of budgets that many federal agencies have at their disposal, guys. The Bureau of the Bureau of Ocean and Energy Management, for example, next to taxation, is the largest revenue generator for the United States federal government.
Yep.
$7 million would be like them funding a huge ass party.
Yep. A weenie roast somewhere. That's what it. Come on.
Article goes on to say Newland concluded that further investigation is required to determine the legacy impacts of the boarding school era on tribal communities today. He recommended a second report that specifically focuses on investigative findings of locations of marked or unmarked burial sites associated with the federal Indian boarding school system, names, ages, and tribal affiliations of children interred at such locations, and an estimation of federal dollars spent supporting the federal Indian boarding school system, as well as native land held in trust by the United States, used to support the federal Indian boarding school system. Again, because remember, it was federally sanctioned. Lastly, here it says, additionally, Newland made 8 recommendations to the Secretary of the Interior to fulfill the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative, including identifying surviving boarding school attendees and documenting their experiences, supporting the protection and preservation of boarding school sites where the federal government has jurisdiction, and to authorize agencies disinter or repatriate any remains of Native children with direction from their respective tribe, community, or family discovered in marked or unmarked burial sites associated with the federal Indian boarding school system. Now here they had said, let's see, supporting the protection and preservation of boarding school sites where the federal government has jurisdiction. So for example, under the National Historic Preservation Act would cover that type of area, and including that is coupled with the Native American Graves and Repatriation Act. Those 2 acts alone would cover that action, which includes right through repatriation, which absolutely should happen. Because our children were taken from us, they were thrown in these schools, they were completely mistreated, and in many cases, sadly, buried there.
Just thrown in a hole.
I'll skip that part. All right. Let's move on, brother.
Let's.
Now we're going to go into the Racism in America segment. And to set this up, I'm going to play another clip for you guys.
President of Delaware State University, which is a historically black college, is expressing outrage after a bus of his lacrosse players was stopped and searched in Georgia. It happened at the end of last month when sheriff's deputies pulled over the bus as it traveled back home from a game in Florida. Their bus was initially stopped for an alleged traffic violation, but it then turned into a search for drugs. Members of the lacrosse team say they were being racially profiled. Police potty cam video of the incident was released.
We reason why I'm stopping is for a left lane violation.
This is the moment Liberty County Sheriff's deputies pulled over a bus of women's lacrosse players last month. After talking to the driver, the sheriff's deputy pokes his head into the bus.
Ladies, how are y'all doing?
When he returns to the car, he makes this remark to a fellow deputy.
There's a bunch of dang schoolgirls on the bus. There's probably some weed. Maybe.
The deputies then inform the driver they're going to search the luggage under the bus. One deputy brings out a drug-sniffing dog. They return to the bus to explain what's happening.
How do we go from being in the wrong lane to doing drug bags?
There are times where we end up finding some children that are missing from their family. We find large amounts of money that nobody knows anything about. Okay? Or large amounts of cocaine, marijuana, heroin, methamphetamines, anything like that, okay? If there is anything in y'all's luggage, we're probably going to find it. Okay? I'm not looking for a little bit of marijuana, but I'm pretty sure you guys as chaperones are probably going to be disappointed in you if we find any.
The deputies proceed to search the bags, going through the women's personal belongings. At one point, they pull out a wrapped gift.
What is that?
I have no clue. My aunt gave it to me.
Your aunt gave it to you?
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what it is?
Georgia, no. I didn't open it. I was waiting until I got back to school. I can open it now.
No, what did she tell you it was?
She didn't tell me anything.
Okay, where did you get it from?
My aunt. In Georgia.
In Georgia?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to open it.
Okay.
And we're going to find out exactly what it is.
Okay.
But however, this is the type of stuff that we look for.
After around 20 minutes of searching, the deputies find no contraband.
All right, ladies, thank you. We're going to get out of here. You guys enjoy the rest of your trip.
At a press conference yesterday, Sheriff William Bowman said multiple vehicles were stopped that morning and that his deputies followed the rules.
The deputy informed the passengers that the search would be completed. This is the same protocol that is expected to be used no matter the race, gender, age, or destination of the passenger.
He later said this.
No personal items on the bus or person were searched.
The president of Delaware State University, Tony Allen, says the incident has left him incensed. He said, quote, "We do not intend to let this or any other incident like it pass idly. We are prepared to go wherever the evidence leads us. We have video, we have allies. Perhaps more significantly, we have the courage of our convictions."
The president of Delaware State University says the historically black school plans to file a civil rights complaint with the Justice Department after a bus carrying the women's lacrosse team was stopped and searched in Georgia last month. The school is accusing sheriff's deputies of misconduct, claiming officers intimidated and humiliated the players, searching their bags for drugs and finding none. The bus driver wasn't even given a ticket.
Sir, you are now up to date.
Like I said, this is not just one case of racial profiling, it's multiple cases.
Mm-hmm.
And that sheriff, I hope they vote his blankety blank out of his position.
Did you notice, like, okay, I'm really wondering who wrote that. What the sheriff was reading. You know, he's up on the podium like this, and he's got his hand, and you see him going like this. And he's like at no time did my officers do anything wrong. And he's, you know what I'm saying? It was like it was like beyond scripted. Yeah, he's like,
yeah, I don't think he wrote it.
No, that's what I'm saying. Was it the mayor? You know, whose hand actually wrote that? He goes, "We are very, very sorry for what we did to these young ladies." You know. Yeah, like maximum whatever the suit can bring, I say bring, you know.
Yep.
Because that was insane.
It was, and totally unnecessary. I hope those officers that participated in that farce lose their jobs. I don't advocate unemployment, but they deserve to be unemployed and lose their right to carry a badge and a handgun anywhere in the state or the country. They deserve that.
Well, I chose that clip because it tended to have more of the body cam footage. In the debates around the use of body cams, and you've seen most departments have a policy where they give some leeway to officers to be able to shut body cameras off depending on the situation. And we've already seen situations where, you know, it's questionable why they turn certain cameras off at certain times, right? I, for one, feel like they shouldn't have that option at all. I feel like that there should be a way to remotely arm and trigger these cameras so that they're running throughout the shift, and then shut down when their shift is over. And then if they do things like cover the camera with something, then they have to explain themselves as to why. You know, I just think that would be a better practice, in my view.
Well, some of the cameras, I think some of the earlier cameras used to activate automatically when they got out of the car. And officers still cover cameras with a piece of tape or something, and they just claim camera malfunction.
Well, that, and, you know, I think that technology is now at the point where we can, they should be streaming through the cloud, which they probably do. I don't know, you know, especially with them trying to roll out 5G now. And, you know, so I've heard excuses where, you know, the onboard storage gets filled up and they have to change, you know, cards out and things like that. There's all kinds of things. You know, there's redundancy if they can shoot to the cloud and, like I said, trigger the cameras remotely. There's a number of things that can be done. But anyway, you know, I don't want to sound like I'm talking out of my butt, but that would help. But in this particular case, they were rolling on that, and yet it didn't really matter. We're still going to, you know, what am I trying to say? I'm glad we're not live right now. That we're going to violate people's rights, and we're going to record ourselves doing that because there's seemingly a belief that there will be no consequences. You know.
Yep.
And you know, I keep using that word. I've used it a few times tonight, but I've used it, you know, in the course of the 6 years we've done this show, which is like, when are we going to actually start to apply consequence in all these areas that we talk about that are supposedly controversial? You know, consequence, you know, again, going back to, you know, things we already were aware of for, you know, the atrocities committed against tribal nations, people in color overall, those atrocities. What is the United States going to get as a consequence for those violations? Right down to these individual, you know, police departments that presumably are there to supposedly protect all of us and defend all of our rights. I don't know, but, you know, we have a real problem when there is no consequence. My argument is, if there is no consequence, there is no law. It's as simple as that.
Oh, that's true.
You know, the one thing I haven't even brought this up, and I'd love to hear your position on this, brother, but when that leaked opinion about abortion came out from the Supreme Court level, that wasn't a legal opinion. That was a personal political opinion. And if you're a sitting Supreme Court justice and you're allowing your political opinion to sway your legal opinion, the consequence should be you lose your job.
It should be, but sadly.
And does your mainstream news media, you know, position an argument that way on our behalf? No.
No.
Not at all. So, you know, I have a real problem when we don't enforce seemingly anything in this country. Why isn't Donald Trump in jail when half of his cabinet are or did?
All right. There's no reason that this investigation should take as long as it is. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
the evidence is right there for everybody to see. Excuse me. There's no reason for it to take this long. If you had been subpoenaed before a grand jury, or I had been subpoenaed before a grand jury, and we said, "Screw you, we're not going to come,"
Exactly.
we'd go to jail.
Exactly.
We'd go to jail.
They ran a quick story about what 6 Republicans that have now been subpoenaed to come before that, the January 6th committee, right? And then they're like, well, I don't know. Are we going to? What if they don't show up? Are they going to be held in contempt of committee? I mean, what weight does that have? It's not a court. It's not a court. So, of course, they're going to laugh at them. Of course, they're going to walk the halls of Congress talking to, press members, at the moment and saying, this is pretty much a scam, this investigation. Yes, but are you going to show up? I don't know. Maybe. I guess I'll do my civic duty.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've seen situations where, somebody committed some kind of an offense, this is on the outside now, okay, where for all intents and purposes, they committed some, I'll say a capital offense.
Mm-hmm.
And they've agreed to turn themselves in, but they're going to schedule when that's going to happen.
Right.
What is this? Go get their ass.
Right.
What do you mean you're going to schedule? Well, Bobby promised he'd be here. He killed that woman. We'll give him to the end of the week to turn himself in.
I know.
What are you talking about?
I hear you. Now, who?
Where is the consequence?
There is none. You murder somebody, you get brought in, you get put behind bars. Not when can you come in? So I don't know. The thing is, sadly, that everything that we see is based on a white supremacist ideology. It's all about protecting that ideology. And people might say, man, you get off the white supremacy, kick. Well, you can't, because that's what this country was founded on.
Yep.
That's what the laws of this country are based on. That's what the injustice to people of color is based on. It's based on white supremacy. Don't give them a fair shake, because they don't deserve it. They're less than human.
My own tribal nation, before there were, the treaties you guys are most familiar with Indian tribes in the 1800s, there was a declaration made against my people, the Pequots, that said, thou shalt no longer be called Pequots by British people. Thou shalt no longer be called Pequot. Thou shalt no longer inhabit the lands that they once knew and loved. I'm sort of improvising a little bit.
All right.
But I can show it to you. It's called they call it a treaty, a Treaty of Hartford. It was not a treaty. It was a proclamation.
Right.
Of what? To my brother's point, white supremacy.
Yep.
You are a conquered people. There's a freaking sign in the middle of my town here that talks about the brave pioneers of the town that borders my reservation after conquering the Pequots. It's on a freaking sign in my town. So when we say it's about white supremacy and we sound like broken records on this show, I know. And so when, if somebody wants to challenge that, sure, Here comes a picture. Here's the sign in my town. Here's the language in the United States Constitution that refers to us as merciless Indian savages.
Yep.
Roll the clock ahead and, Charlottesville, Virginia.
Yep.
The Jews will not replace us.
Jews will not replace us. Jews will not replace us.
Universities, the torch-wielding white nationalists coming face-to-face.
A demonstration by white nationalists at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville.
White lives matter. White lives matter. White lives matter. White lives matter.
What you have.
Yep.
Anybody that doesn't think or agree like them become the outcast.
Oh, sure.
So it's not even people of color, really. There are actually white people that they don't like either. And those ladies, I'm sorry, brother, last point. Those ladies, those are the ladies, those white women are going to have just as difficult of a time getting an abortion as women of color.
They are. They certainly are. That's why I say the move, the push to save white supremacy and bolster the ideology of white supremacy is being done at the expense of women's bodies.
Yep.
It's all about numbers.
I want politicians to stop using this phrase. We're better than that.
No, you're not. No, you're not, folks. You're not better than that.
Or we're better than this. You'll hear it like when, the kid that just shot 10 or 13 people in Buffalo, New York. His rifle had inscripted on the butt of it that said, kill N-word.
Yep.
Guarantee you got people walking around the halls of Congress that support the Second Amendment going, we're better than this. Prove it.
I had to kind of step on some toes on Facebook earlier today when people were saying, pray for Buffalo, pray for my hometown. And I said, I'm praying for the families of the victims that were murdered. I'm not praying for some town. Buffalo's part of the reason that happened.
That loser that calls herself the governor of New York almost said those exact words. This is Buffalo. I'm from Buffalo.
Your term. It's hard to know what to say. This is my community. I know this community well. I've walked these streets. I know the individuals who live here. It's a wonderful, tight-knit neighborhood. And to see that sense of security shattered by an individual, a white supremacist who has engaged in an act of terrorism and will be prosecuted as such. Yes, I'm here to console the families in a community that is feeling so much pain right now. But mark my words, we'll be aggressive in our pursuit of anyone who subscribes to the ideals professed by other white supremacists, and how there's a feeding frenzy on social media platforms where hate festers more hate. That has to stop.
And you look at her face and you go, you don't give a crap about this part of Buffalo?
Nope. Nope.
You're worried about November. This person who assumed the role of governor because her boss was a corrupt MF. I could go off for another hour about how he treats Native people in the state of New York.
Yep.
Andrew Cuomo. It's all around us. And I'm not trying to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but we can pull example after example after example of inert racism.
Yep.
And no consequence or punishment for people that are doing the committing. Like I said, this kid shot 13 people, killed 10, and goes, I didn't do it. Not guilty. I'm pleading not guilty. Because he believes he's going to get a lighter sentence. I'm only 18. I didn't know what I was doing.
They'll pull every trick out of their butts that they can come up with.
The press were asking the so-called governor of New York, how do you get a fully automatic weapon at 18? Well, we're looking into that.
Was it one weapon or more than one weapon, and were the weapons legally obtained or not? Do we know?
My understanding is that it was a legally obtained weapon, but it was modified with illegal magazines that could have been acquired anywhere. We're going to find out where they came from, but they're
right now we're looking into that, is what she said.
I understand it was legally purchased.
Well, that's what she said. But then they're like, oh, okay, well, legally purchased. How did he legally purchase it at his age? But we're looking into that. Meanwhile, nobody wants to have a true discussion and, to the point of resolution of, they keep calling it what? Common sense gun laws? Please. They keep talking about the problem isn't the gun, the problem is mental health. The problem is both.
There were two other shootings.
Because there's a brain attached to a finger that pulls a trigger.
There were two other shootings today in two different states. And I don't know.
Yeah, I know. That's what that's where I'm at. It's like, we're at an hour and 37 minutes in this particular episode. We could go on for another 2 hours and make common sense, bring up common sense examples. And it doesn't mean a damn thing.
Doesn't mean a thing.
Because what you wisely always say, brother, there's no will in this country to change.
No, thank you. No,
politically or otherwise.
Nope. White privilege is alive and well. People are not about to give it up willingly, because that would mean they would be uncomfortable. It would mean that they would have to be fair. It would mean that they would have to stop demonizing, their neighbors of color and, snickering about their jokes about their neighbors of color and calling their neighbors of color, the little racial innuendos. That's what it would mean. It would mean leveling the playing field. It would mean competing against someone of color and possibly losing to someone of color in the job market.
I couldn't even fathom how many guns are in this country.
Millions.
And more.
Literally millions.
And more being made every day. If they're not.
Literally, I think the last figure I saw was either 4 million or 7 million guns in this country that are owned by gun owners.
Oh, okay. Those are just quote unquote legally owned. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
So now triple that with all the ones that are stored in that attic or that secret compartment in the basement of, some Southern home. Why do you need a fully automatic weapon to kill Bambi?
Well, you can't legally purchase a fully automatic weapon. Not an AR platform rifle. You can't legally purchase one. People modify them to fire automatically, but you cannot purchase a fully automatic rifle or handgun in this country. So if that person owned or had in his possession a fully automatic weapon, it was modified to be so. You can't legally purchase one in this country. So there's no will, there's no desire to do what needs to be done to stop this madness. There's no will nor desire. People are, it doesn't affect me. Why should I care?
If you're not hunting for subsistence reasons, why should anyone have a gun? See, I don't understand what sport hunting is. It sounds pretty sick to me.
It is sick. Sport hunting has got nothing to do.
Or trophy hunting, or whatever the hell they call it.
Yeah, but it's called both. Most of it's got nothing to do with subsistence hunting. It's killing something for the sake of killing it, to sometimes put it on the wall as a badge of honor. Look what I did.
Yep.
It's. No, I'll admit I like to target shoot. I like to competition shoot.
Yeah, but you're not killing anything in that sense. And in those situations, aren't they pretty much in controlled environments anyway?
Kind of.
Okay, I get it. You can be target shooting in your backyard. I get it, but I know there's rules around that too. Like, you're not supposed to be firing a weapon so many feet from a house, I guess, or something, depending on where you live or whatever. But
correct.
I don't know. I'm not a gun owner, obviously. The only gun I have. Okay, let me qualify. Let me qualify this. I have one gun in the house, and it's owned by that guy right there. That he left here. And I have no idea how to even mess with it. But
it's powered by air.
It's powered by, exactly. It's a pellet rifle. Yeah. So that shows you what I know, which is nothing. But I just don't understand the concept. So I understand subsistence hunting and fishing. I've got many friends in some of our tribal communities, but like I said, I've said it before, the folks I'm referring to in terms of the sport hunting areas, they're not saying prayers before they go out. They're not saying prayers directly after they killed something. And they're not saying prayers, that animal helped feed their family. Okay.
No, they're running around yelling, high-fiving. That's what they're doing.
Exactly.
Sitting on the animal they just murdered.
So I guess they're lucky I'm not in Washington, because as far as I'm concerned, you don't need a gun and you don't deserve the gun. And if I could, outlaw it, I would. And even after I outlawed it, I know damn well that you'll find a way to get one anyway. So country was founded on that crap.
Yep, it was. It was.
So.
Well, my bag is empty.
My bag is empty as well, brother. And we thank you guys very much. As always, we offer ourselves and this show up. If you would like to comment on anything that you've heard today or episodes from the past, please, again, reach us by emailing us, hosts with an S, hosts@nativeopinion.com. We're available through Facebook. It's facebook.com/Native Opinion Podcast. We're available out on Twitter. It's at Native Opinion over there. Our website, again, nativeopinion.com. And you can also leave us a voicemail or a text message at 860-800-5595. Any of those ways will work. And we always really appreciate your feedback and your discussions, about what we talk about. So by all means, use any of those ways, and we appreciate it. So my name is Michael Kicking Bear. I'm from the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation, located in the state of Connecticut. The guy over there, he is
David Gray Owl, an Echota Cherokee Tribe of Alabama citizen, and I won't be living in Southwest Florida much longer.
That reminds me.
Yes.
Yeah, Dave and I had a conversation. We think what we're going to be doing for now is recording or even live shows on Sunday nights at 8 o'clock, if we can make that work, until Dave's life settles down. So that's the loose plan. So we will let you guys know in future episode if we're going to start doing some live streaming, which we're about ready to go, I think. But for now we're pre-recording our episodes, as we've been saying. So again, thanks you guys for all of your immense patience. We really do appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
And so you guys have a great one. We'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Be safe.